Now, our first report is on the Pentagon Papers, right? And I think this idea is it's something I think a lot of us may have heard about in terms of just briefly kind of understood, right? And I think a lot of us kind of like our eyes glazed over a bit because the idea was like rich people hide their money, right? Where and the idea is, yeah, we know already, Sleepy. What are we talking about? And this idea here, we need to really dig in for the simple fact of really understanding or just really gaining some more understanding here, because I think it's definitely interesting and noteworthy in itself. But the idea of us really moving into any type of renaissance, I think the understanding that we gain from these events is telling of a really the pattern when we really dig in. And so, for those that don't know, the Pandora or the did I call it the Pentagon Papers? I meant the Pandora Papers. I'm sorry, but the idea of the Pandora Papers is really a result of millions of leaked documents, right? And this is really noted as really the biggest really collaboration in terms of journalism partnership across like different nations and things of that nature, right? And the papers really came from leaks from 14 different offshore services or service firms. And these firms basically just specialize in how to hide money, right? And thankful for us, rich people go to the same people. They go to a lot of the same firms to hide money, regardless of where they're from. And this idea, in terms of this this leak, we got world leaders, and of course, I think nobody's really surprised about that. But we also have criminals, and I'm not talking like about like like your uncle or your cousin, but like con artists. So kind of like your uncle and your cousin, but just more successful, right? And the idea here is that the people here are also into things like, of course, human trafficking and murdering, right? And so these are some pretty big names. I think one guy in particular was like a mob boss or some kind of really top guy for like just the criminal organizations that got caught up in terms of this particular leak, which is which is something in itself. But I mean, when we talk about like world leaders, I mean, it's like almost like a prerequisite that they have to be criminals in order to be world leaders today. But in any way, the idea was just a quote here. The secret documents expose offshore dealings of the King of Jordan, the presidents of Ukraine, Kenya, and Ecuador, the Prime Minister of Czech Republic, and we'll talk about that in a second, the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, right? And the files also detail financial activities of Russian President Vladimir Putin's unofficial Minister of Propaganda, and more than 130 billionaires from Russia, the United States, Turkey, and other nations. Now, this article really talks about really a lot of different things, but really what I think surprises, probably will surprise a lot of you guys, is just how prevalent the U.S. is when it comes down to a place where a lot of people can go and face loose restrictions regarding really laundering money in general, or just money laundering and really how to buy property anonymously and things of that nature, right? And this is like, according to like Reuters in 2020, we're literally next up, right after the Cayman Islands, and right in front of Switzerland. And that's, I mean, if when you think about people hiding money, if you ask U.S. versus Swiss, and you try to survey people, usually, I mean, you're probably going to hear Switzerland before the U.S., but we're actually more popular. And that is very interesting, right? Because there's even another report about just real estate and how loose we are with our really trying to figure out who owns certain properties and try to tag this property to a certain owner rather than some kind of just front company, basically. And we got some serious problems, and that's, it's pretty stark. But this idea of, other than just the U.S. just absolutely being tremendous hypocrites, because we'll point to other islands and we'll say, hey, look, you guys need to reform your stuff. It's like there is no nobody pointing at us really saying like what's going on here, or at least nobody gets platforms saying that. But it is, we're literally second on this list, which is crazy. But in terms of just other notes and points, I think the idea of our favorite prime minister of the Czech Republic made it into 2 episodes, the first 2 episodes. I'm shocked. But this guy, it's crazy. This guy gets in, he's like, I don't know if you remember in the first episode, if you watched it, the idea was this guy got in under the guise of, we're going to be the business-centered solution to corruption. And it was absolute just a clown show, basically, with this guy, and, basically in the courts. But essentially, this guy got caught on the papers, and particularly, I think in the first episode we talked about how his company was responsible for, polluting a river and killing almost 100,000 fish or something like that. But in terms of this particular, what's happening in the actual papers, what's been found is that this guy purchased some $22 million chateau in the French Riviera. And it's crazy. It's crazy. Well, I probably got this in the script somewhere, but the idea is that a lot of us kind of say hey, rich people hide their money. There's nothing really new here. But I don't think a lot of us really understand these people, these world leaders, we'll call them. They come from nations where people are literally struggling. And that's a tremendous, you think about, $22 million here, some politician hiding that. Yeah, that's absolutely a big deal, but you're not, those politicians' constituents aren't starving. They're not, the way they live is not such a stark difference between these guys in terms of with a lot of these other countries. And that's what's so crazy, because a lot of it slides under the rug. And it's crazy. We'll get to, I know I got that in the script later, but we'll get to really just hammering on that point a little bit more. But the idea of the papers themselves, all in all, the investigators exposed 956 companies and 336 high-level politicians. And these amount to at least, now this number isn't, we can't really, or the investigators couldn't quite hammer down in terms of how much came from tax evasion, and there's a lot of basically people PR for the people who were literally in these files talking about hey, look, that's taxed, but my government won't release that information, basically. Or there's some kind of like, it's not a clear cut case with a lot of these cases, but $11.3 trillion was held in offshore assets. That amount of money in fluctuation is not. There's another report we'll start talking a little bit more down the line in terms of the actual, not on this particular report, but down the line in terms of this building up problem of income inequality. And I think a tremendous thing that really came up for me was the idea of how shameless a lot of these politicians were. Because I mean, we talked about our favorite prime minister in the Czech Republic, but also this idea of people and politicians. These guys would literally have platforms where they're just like, hey, we need to fight corruption and take a stand against people who evade taxes. They are in the papers. Their family members somehow end up in the papers, which is pretty obvious. But the idea is, or their administration, they're all in the, like, they're getting it, like, the exposing of these guys is crazy. And it's not like, it's really something to really understand just how shameless a lot of these guys are when they get up in front and they talk to people. You really got to get that through, because in particular we definitely have a problem today in terms of that in the US, but really having that understanding that you're talking to an ad campaign, like with a lot of these people. What happens in reality, it will be night and day for a lot of these guys, and we have to understand that, and we have to start measuring them less by how charismatic or how they're able to present to crowds, and more about what's really going on. And this idea of really the idea of I suppose holding these guys accountable. What I really wanted, like, I really think we should applaud two countries that are mentioned in this particular article that I'm going to link. But the idea is Iceland and Pakistan, right? They had a tremendous street protest where a lot of protesters came out and eventually helped really topple a lot of corrupt leaders. And this is, I mean, we need this. We really do need this, right? Because when it came down to the idea of what's happening with, even, and we'll talk about this in another report, but this idea of really what's happening with this another war really brewing in the Middle East right now. Like, when Israel asked for money for what they were doing, all of our politicians stood up to support them. We have instances where people are asked, like, oh, where would you go abroad or whatever, and they go out of their way to say, oh, Israel, of course. And that idea is, I mean, the amount and the extent to where we have been co-opted is not something that we can ignore, right? This has to be addressed in the right way, because there are people who are truly anti-Semitic out there. And I will say that in this particular case, the idea of, being anti-Israeli government, or, what's happening, is seen now as anti-Semitic. And they're trying, or it's not being seen as, it's being advertised now. We're trying to broaden the definition for anti-Semitism to be anti-Israel or anti-Israeli government or just pro-Palestinian in any way. It's a growing problem. And it doesn't need to be left to really be addressed by, like I said, truly anti-Semitic people, because there are people who are coming to the conclusion that, hey, we shouldn't be doing this, but they're coming to that conclusion through really just the wrong thinking in general, right? They're not making that distinction between Israeli people and Jewish people, and I don't mean to turn this into a talk between Israel and Jewish people in general, but the idea is that's kind of the problem right now, the biggest upfront problem in terms of what we kind of know and makes really in the news more. But there are tremendous problems with corporations trying to lobby to, essentially just find ways to sell us like just the byproduct from a lot of the stuff that they produce and put it into our food a lot of times. It's crazy. We don't have, like, that idea. What's happening in America right now, we can't simply just allow it, right? And corrupt politicians is we're like, if you went back, who was it who had to give up his peanut farm? One of the politicians had to give up his peanut farm because this is definitely a conflict of interest, and it was, if you think about that versus today, where you got what's it called, the Trump coin. I don't know what the actual official name is, but that idea of this guy in office doing that now versus then, and we're just kind of saying, oh, this is, politicians. It's like, are we just like accepting that? It's crazy. And in terms of the lesson here, I think is with this whole not Pentagon, Pandora Papers. I keep saying the Pentagon Papers, and the Pentagon Papers are interesting in themselves. If you haven't looked into that, please do. But the idea of the Pandora Papers, the idea and the lesson here, I think, is really told through really understanding two things. One, the planet of Venus and the zodiac sign of Pisces, right? And this is interesting because Venus would represent this spectrum of things, right? But for the purpose of this segment, you should really understand that it also represents money, right? And Pisces also rules over the spectrum of things, and no doubt in my mind we'll talk a lot about that, but the idea here is that it rules over what is hidden, right? And Venus is known to be exalted in Pisces. That's what's crazy. Like that's what that means is basically there's a strong impulse when it comes down to the concept of Venus and Pisces. I really gotta keep it aligned here in terms of before I go off the rails and start talking more and more about it. But the idea here is money. The impulse to hide money can be tremendous, right? And the idea here is that this exaltation is it's a manifestation of an impulse that Venus and Pisces yields to, right? But we can really, really translate this, right? Or try to alchemize this into another way, right? So we don't necessarily have to deal with this particular manifestation. The idea here is that when we talk about this spectrum that really belongs to Pisces, or the spectrum that really belongs to Venus, we're talking about really tremendous, there is such a wide variety for how this manifestation can occur. Our society is structured to where we can kind of, with like this, it makes way more sense for this to really occur. Or there's, uh, we see this, this occurrence more relevant in society in general. But I really want people to understand that we can also, out of this spectrum, particularly, for instance, this is an example, right? So in this spectrum of Pisces, we can also pull out the idea of inspiration, right? And in this spectrum of Venus, we can also talk about art. And if, like I said, this is just one example. So if it's dumb, don't be in the comments like, Sleepy, this is stupid, shut up. All right. But the idea here is, maybe after we uncover and expose how society really makes it easy for people to hide money, we can really choose to create a society that helps incentivize people to create more inspirational Pisces art, Venus.